Uh, Hello everyone, and welcome to SIG Autoscaling weekly meeting for Monday the 15th of April 2024. Got a few items on the agenda already. Kuba, do you want to start on the Carter discussion?
Yeah, definitely. As mentioned in the agenda, basically, last week I brought up an update to the official Kubernetes documentation that I sent out for review that aims to document the entirety of like node autoscaling in a scope that captures both us and by us I mean cluster autoscaler here and Carpenter. So that's still in review. I haven't received any comments yet. I don't know if anybody got a chance to read it. And this also touches on another point I have in the agenda since like 3 weeks back, which is aligning the core concept naming between us and Carpenter. So essentially renaming scale up to provisioning and scale down to consolidation. The documentation uses the new terms. So again, if there's any opposition to this, please let me know. If not, at this point, I think there is consensus to do this change. Nobody has brought up any differing opinions. So I think we can just proceed with the pull request review for the docs and then merge that. That's okay with everybody.
Yeah, I think that seems reasonable to me.
I think you're muted.
Don't know. All right, cool. Yeah, that okay. Yeah, that seems reasonable to me. Same as Elmiko, I haven't had the chance to give it a read over yet, but I will give it a look over this evening.
Thank you.
So I think we probably should go with the documentation part first, because I think that's a good place for alignment, because that documentation pull request is I think already written with the assumption of naming change, and it kind of discusses the details. So I think that's a good place to have discussion. I've done the review internally before, so I'm quite familiar with this, but it would be good, I think, to have Carpenter team and you guy in particular, but also anyone else interested weigh in on this particular PR. Again, I think this is a very good place for this discussion.
Awesome. I think I saw Adrian in the cluster channels, unless there's anything more on that on the alignment. I shall take that as no. Adrian.
Hi. So just intro, I'm new here, looking for ways to get involved with Kubernetes. And so kind of the context here is quite a few years ago, I noticed that label selectors on deployments that weren't specific enough, so label selectors that matched pods in that deployment or others, would cause issues with an HPA. The documentation does say this. Well, the documentation says that label selectors should be specific. But just kind of looking around at pull requests, I noticed that the VPA added functionality to avoid this. So it would use the owner ref, I think, to target only those pods. And so there's a difference between the HPA and the VPA's behavior. And so I brought it up in the channel, and is it Michael redirected me to the call to discuss it, and you know, I don't know if it is a bug. I don't know if it's a change we want to make. So that's kind of the context of the issue.
I made the pull request for the VPA part because we faced some problems with the VPA updater and adopting pod of different deployment because of label selector overlapping. It's true that I didn't propose anything for the HPA. I don't know if it would make sense or not.
It feels like a fairly big change for what is a core API. I think we should decide whether that is the behavior we want, but trying to fix it in HPA might be fun.
Yes, I think
It is
like back when we discussed the PR for VPA, one of the main arguments was that the deployment controller itself has a very similar logic, right? To determine which pods match their deployment or not. So it only made sense to really have the same kind of check also in the VPA.
that is something I also discovered when looking at this years ago, was deployment controller knew exactly which pods it owned by using ownerref. Is this one of those cases where it's harder to iterate on code that is in KK because it's harder to get bug fixes out, and that so it's you kind of have to tread more carefully.
But the bug fixes are fairly easy, are easy enough. But yeah, changes in behavior is going to be, I think, a fairly careful process.
Yeah, I think kind of conceptually it makes sense, right? But the question is, like, to what extent this is a backward incompatible change that can break something. People have HPA objects that may be created years ago and never touched in all this time. And so I think this is a problem with the core APIs in particular. So I think the discussion would be on, is it possible that we break someone? And if so, there is some like process in Kubernetes. I actually don't know, because the process is for changes in API, but here it's more of a behavior change. So I'm not even clear what the process is. But that would be, I think, the main argument and the main discussion, rather than whether this makes sense. How do you make it seamless?
Yeah, I think the issue is the best place to discuss it for the moment of trying to understand what we actually think the desired behavior is, and how much we're different from it, and how much of a problem we actually think it is, given obviously the deployment logic already having that testing of ownerrefs.
And edge cases like when you're busy rolling to a new replica set, what happens if the HPA is counting and it only gets half of the pods because you're busy changing to the replica set? And edge cases like that might be tricky to figure out. Sorry.
Clayton?
So I was going to ask, there are legitimate reasons for you to have a scaler that the autoscaler is targeting that don't control all of the pods in the HPA selection set. And that would be something along the lines of, you have built something that's more complex than just the trivial HPA, and you're using you have a more complex like scaling model. For instance, you have pods under there that you want to sum the usage so that the autoscaler scales the slack capacity. I don't know how common that is. I know that was one of the very, very, very early HPA discussions was about, services allow you to run multiple backends in front of them or behind them, right? You can run multiple deployments behind a service, and that's intentional. And there was a thought to doing that with HPA. But I think in practice, a lot of people, they're just using HPA to scale their deployments. I think maybe there's a bigger question, which is, why don't people do that? And whether they should, which would, I think, help inform that. Like, if we can make a legitimate argument that no one is doing this or that it wouldn't work, that would strengthen the argument for doing it. But conversely, there may be things like, if you're doing that, maybe you're just using a more complicated autoscaler today. And maybe that's a gap in HPA.
Yeah, there's definitely people I've talked to in the past that were doing something similar and then built a custom thing on top. Cool. Anything more on that from anyone? Krishna.
Hi, Guy. How are you? This is in regards to follow-up from our last week conversation. I was wondering if you got a chance to look into the code and create PR.
No, I've not had time this week, unfortunately.
And there is another question also I have. I mean, one is, this issue is really, really impacting us. Anything we could do to speed up the process, Guy, from our end?
I mean, if you are able to find someone else who's familiar with threat code, who has the bandwidth to sort of review things, would be the only suggestion.
Got it. Another question I have is, I mean, if we wanted to backport this fix to older versions, is there any restrictions on how many versions we can go back to?
We currently only support back to 127. So anything, anything cherry picked further back from that will not get, wouldn't get pulled into a release cut by us. Yeah, I guess, yeah, it's a bug fix, so we'd be happy sort of cherry picking it back as far as 127. Next batch of patch releases, I think would be May off the top of my head. So yeah, it would be a month or so before they got picked up into a set of releases as well, assuming that we get the PR raised and merged, and cherry picks raised and merged before then.
Got it. And by then, if we can either get help from you or find someone who can help. Got it. And I mean, from our side, right? We are not familiar with the code that much. Definitely, we need help from the community to help us. So I'm wondering, if you didn't get a chance, any takers, who can help us in this area, in this bug fix.
I think unfortunately we're a bit limited in terms of like people who are still active who have touched the AWS provider code at this point. I think it's myself, David, who are the two maintainers, and then David, who's not on this call, and then I think that's about it that are in terms of current active regular attendees.
Yeah, I was just gonna say +1 to what you're saying, Guy. Like Krishna, this is kind of the difficult part. Although there are a lot of us here who like to talk about the cluster autoscaler, and we seem to know many parts of it. The individual providers are maintained by separate groups of people or separate teams of people. So, not all of us know the AWS provider. So at some level, part of this is finding the people who can review it, thoroughly for you. To the level of quality of the project is kind of trying to achieve.
Got it. Yeah, thanks, Almiko. I understand, right? You're all busy, but at the same time, I'm trying to see if there is any way we can minimize this impact. It's really, really helping, actually affecting lots of our production workloads increasingly. I mean, it's sooner or later, carpentry is another alternative solution we're thinking of, but it's a very, very long way. But in the mean interim, right, if we can able to address this problem for next 2-3 years, right, we can stay on cluster autoscaler. That's the reason we're thinking of. But I do understand. So yeah, let me see what I can do from our side. But it's very, very difficult for us to get a coder who can contribute because especially they have very limited knowledge on the cluster autoscaler and AWS provider too in this case. Anyone you would recommend who knows the code? Perhaps I can reach him out personally.
Yeah, the one other person, it's David Morrison, I want to say.
Yeah, Morrison.
Yeah. So you'll find him as listed as one of the other maintainers of the AWS cloud provider implementation. I'll link the owner's file in the notes of the call.
Thank you. So 1.3, we can go back to 1.27 you said, right? I just wanted to reconfirm.
Yes, that's currently the furthest back we would cut a release for.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Jack.
Yeah, real quick, Krishna, I know this isn't going to help you in the near term, but the Cluster Autoscaler project is actually really good about distributing responsibility between the core product and the providers. And so I can speak to the Azure experience. It's taken some time, but we've built up expertise and responsiveness and enough folks who are maintainers there that we can move super fast. So if we find a bug, we can get it reviewed and merged the same day. So, and if I asked the core team to review it, it would probably never happen because they just as by design, the provider code is meant to be provider maintained, not core maintained. So I would suggest that the way forward could be you and your team. You could reach out to look at the commit history in AWS and find the sufficient folks and look at the owner's file. And if you feel like this is a critical business risk for you, then if you can find people who are willing to maintain the AWS provider. Maybe the folks in the owner's file currently just don't have cycles and be happy to go through a process where you can take that over.
Got it. Thank you, Jack. I'll do that. I'll go through the particular file and see most recent contributors and I'll reach out. Thank you, Jack.
Clayton.
This is my topic.
Yep.
All right. So thank you. We sent an email around about 2 weeks ago proposing a new working group serving, which would be focused on supporting accelerated workloads, primarily inference, right? AI is the new hot thing, so everybody wants to jump on that bandwagon. But the mindset being, we've got the DRA working group. There's a ton of really important changes to Kubernetes that are being proposed in terms of the complexity of the resource model. And one of the inputs to this is we observe a lot of people running very large accelerated inference workloads. And we know that a lot of people probably in the future will be running more accelerated inference workloads. So we wanted to bring use cases that were specific to serving. We already have working group batch, and that's done actually a pretty good job of driving batch related AI workloads, but there was really a gap on the serving side. SIG Apps has been, I don't want to say quiet, but it hasn't been a source of new features and requests that target workload authors. So the proposal is, I sent this all around, it's all in the very long email, and we have a bunch of use cases, but the areas that I think we wanted to focus on were making sure that all of the kube components work really well with hardware when you're trying to do serving. So HPA is a fundamental part of regular services. And so we want to make sure that we're creating a forum to go both support and find use cases, adapting them to make sense within the Kubernetes space, and then helping the SIGs or working within the SIGs to drive feature improvements. For autoscaling specifically, a lot of the use cases around accelerated workloads is they're very expensive and they're actually fairly predictable in terms of the workload. And so they should, in theory, be extremely efficient. But in practice, it tends to be something that you have to do a lot of work. And so at least certainly on the Google side, we've generated a lot of internal feedback around, custom metrics are really important. The latency of scale up and scale down matters because accelerators actually take a long time to start up in the cloud in practice. I think there's some interesting use cases down the road on that are novel for serving because it takes so long to start up, where potentially we might want to have some primitives that make it easier to explicitly express how many spare instances you want sitting around. And you do that today through HPA, right? It's actually fairly easy. You just put a buffer in your custom metric that's a set of overhead, and HPA will keep more instances around than you need. One of the things we've been kind of punting around in some discussions would be what are some improvements we could make to that process that make it easier to set that. So saying how many replicas you want to stay around for safety, or how many replicas you want to stay around for traffic. And I don't know that all of these necessarily will be Kubernetes features, but there's enough interest that we wanted to both draw representation from a bunch of users, connect that to the SIGs, and then make sure that the folks participating were working with all the SIGs to go and understand what are the key gaps, and then communicate those effectively, and then also to invite SIG participation as well. So folks who are interested in these areas and may have had trouble getting your use cases across, we want to be a spot to concentrate and bring energy to bring some of these features to completion. So that is my quick pitch.
Nice. Did I see a hand up, or am I imagining it? So will that email thread will, I'm guessing, get the update once the first meeting's scheduled?
Yep, Sergey was out last week, and he's going to send around a proposal. He's going to open a PR for the working group. We're going to talk in SIG apps today, which will probably be the main sponsoring SIG, and then we'll hopefully within a couple of weeks get on the calendar and have a first meeting. We'll try to have a little bit more in advance of that first meeting so folks can suggest topics and sit around. So thanks, Guy.
Can we count on the SIG Autoscaling email group as a source of updates on when the meeting is going to happen and so on?
Yeah, we'll send an email around to the original list. I thought SIG Autoscaling was on the original. If it's not, that's on me.
It was on the original email. I just wanted to make sure that this is the right channel to monitor.
Yes.
Thank you.
Jack.
Did I link to the right Google Doc that's tracking the first meeting, or is that different? It's device called Work Group Device Management.
That's the other one. I'll send out the.
That's the other one.
I'll paste it in the chat. Sorry.
Everybody stay on your toes.
There's two long working group, new working group email threads kicking around.
And we were intending to connect them so that we'd be a little bit more consistent. Think of device management as the lower layer, and serving and batch being the higher layers was a little bit of how we thought about it.
Yeah, cool. I think for what I do here, I got to go to both. So cool. And I'm sure you too, Clayton.
Awesome. Thanks very much. Pretty much takes us to time. Thanks very much, everyone. And yeah, see you next week.
Thanks. Later.
Thanks. Bye.